Okay, so we're going to do another maths question now. This one does look a little bit different to the one that we just did before. That's because it doesn't have those two steps to it. It doesn't say rearrange the equation and then sub in this value to find blah 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 blah. It just has the question in and of itself or by itself. So our question is, the area A of a circle is given by A equals pi r squared, where r is the radius. Find the value of r when A equals 20 centimeters squared. Now this shouldn't be a new formula for us because we all know how to find the area of a circle. So if you're sat there thinking, what is the area of a circle? Then go and do that before you read this. Okay? So there are two ways that you can do this, and it does not matter which way you pick. You can either sub the number in straight away, and then you have to do some rearranging to solve what r is, or you could rearrange it to start with and then sub in afterwards. I personally always like to rearrange my formula first before I sub my number in. I don't know why, I just like to do it that way. I am not going to be upset if you choose to do it the other way. It all works out the same. You do the exact same amount of effort, you just do it in a different order. Okay? So just because I do it my way doesn't mean that you can't do it a different way, just as long as you are still doing it in a mathematically correct way. So with that in mind, I am going to rearrange my formula so r is the subject, because r is what I'm trying to find. So what you're trying to find needs to be your subject. So the first thing I do is to write down the formula that I'm given. That is always the first thing I do. You will hear me say that a lot. I will continue to say it until you no longer get to listen to me, and you've still got a while for that, so that's really unfortunate for you. So we've got A equals pi r squared. We want to get the r by itself. If we're doing our reverse BOMDAS, there's no subtractions here, there's no additions here. There is, well, there's no division, but there is a multiply. So we have pi times r squared. Remember that pi is just a number. So it's given as a symbol, but that symbol just represents an irrational number that we can't physically write down in its entirety. Okay? So you could replace this with 3.14159, blah, 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 and it would work out the exact same. So pi gets treated as a number. So we would divide this across just like we would if that was a 2 or a 7 or an 89. So we're going to divide both sides by pi if my pen works. Yes, it does. So divide both sides by pi. So a divided by pi is obviously just a over pi, and that equals r squared, because pi r squared divided by pi is just r squared. The last thing we need to get rid of is this squared. Obviously, the way that we get rid of a squared is to square root. Remember, this entire thing needs to be within that square root. So you can't just do the square root of a divided by pi. You can't do a divided by the square root of pi. It has to be the whole thing. Okay? So draw your big square root. Pop your a over pi in there. We'll shrink this down a little bit. And that's r. So it's already rearranged. So I'm going to put my little therefores in there, just because I'm all about consistency in this, if nothing else. So there it is, it's all rearranged. So the only thing that we need to do now to get the answer to the question is to sub this value for a in. So everywhere I see an a in here, I'm going to put a 20. It only happens once because sometimes life is easy. So we're just going to throw that one in there. So what you can do to aid your communication is just tell me what you're going to do. So I could have done that up here. I could have said, rearrange, I'll write it, shall I? Or I would if my pen was not being a butt face. Rearrange, blah, blah, blah. So R is the subject. So I can physically tell you what I'm doing, and that makes it easier for someone to follow it along. So I've rearranged, so R is the subject, there I have, and then we're going to sub in A equals 20 to find R. This is not an essential step, but it is a useful step. And in a question like this, it's a really easy question, so you don't necessarily have to have it in there, but it's really good to get into the habit of doing it. Because if you don't do it now, then when you get your really complicated questions where there's got multiple steps and it's going to be hard for you to keep track of it, you won't already be in that habit. And a lot of the things that we do in maths are habitual, so you need to be building those habits as you start. So we'll throw it in there, sub in a equals 20 to find r. So r equals square root of 20, I'm going to pop it in brackets because that's what I do, divided by pi. I grabbed a calculator. I don't know where I put it, it's behind me. So I'm going to pop that into my calculator. Again, a lot of the time when I'm faced with something like this, which technically is a multi-step, because you are kind of finding 20 divided by pi and then you're finding the square root, sometimes it's not best to just throw it all into the calculator, because there can be a lot of syntax errors in your calculator. If you don't put a bracket in at one point, then the calculator can completely misinterpret what you're trying to say. So if you can, do it in little steps. So these little steps that I'll do here, I'll do r equals the square root of, I'll work out on my calculator what 20 divided by pi is. Where's my pi button? Here. So 20 divided by pi is 6.37. That is obviously rounded because it's a big old decimally number here. You write the rounded one, but you keep the decimally one in your calculator, because otherwise you're going to get some rounding error. And then I'm just going to put my little therefores in. Therefore r equals, and I'm just going to find the square root of that number, which is 2.52. So again, that's rounded, but you have to round it by the time you get to the answer. 2 decimal places is usually a pretty solid bet when you're rounding. Obviously pay attention to the question. If it's asking you for number of people, don't round it to 2 decimal places, because that would be a massacre. Just make sure that the number of decimal places that you're rounding to is reasonable and it makes sense for the context. I don't expect you to round it to like 8 decimal places, because I'm going to get bored after about 3 anyway. Remembering that this is a question in context, because it's a maps question, this is going to have some units. So r is our radius, which is a unit of measurement. So we're going to be looking for which one it is, and we can see that it's centimeters, because the area is in centimeters squared. So r equals 2.52 centimeters. What do I have to do before I'm finished? I have to put it into a sentence, which is as simple as, when a equals 20 centimeters squared, r equals 2.52 centimeters. I'm not asking for an essay, I'm not asking for an evaluative report, literally just shove it in a little sentence at the end, and we're all going to be happy and we're going to part as friends. So that's our second example of a maps question, and now you can go and do some questions for your stuff.